Okay, so welcome everybody. We have two portions today, Tazria and Metzora. It's in some sense, very difficult portions. It's about ritual impurity. So a lot of this is not applied today in the conventional sense. There is a lot of details, a lot to think about, but the commentators explain how many of this symbolism of this parsha is very much alive and very much relevant. So we'll do as we usually do. We'll begin with the parsha in a nutshell, and we'll get the summary. And essentially, there's two portions. The first is focused more on the impurity, and the second portion is focused more on the process of purification. So here we go. So we have Tazria and Metzora, these two portions. The name of the parsha, Tazria, means to conceive. Tazria comes from the word zera, which is seed. So it could be planting a seed. In this context, it's a woman conceiving, and is found in Leviticus 12:2. The name of the parsha, Metzora, is often translated as leper, and is found in Leviticus 14:12. The reason why they say often translated is because most of the commentaries understand this not to mean conventional leprosy, but that's the translation that people usually use. In any case, the parsha of Tazria continues the discussion of the laws of Tumah v'Tahara, impurity and purity, ritual impurity and purity. Okay, so what do we start with? A woman giving birth should undergo a process of purification, which includes immersing in a mikvah, a naturally gathered pool of water, and bringing offerings to the holy temple. All male infants are to be circumcised on the 8th day of life. That's the opening passage, but it's certainly not the majority of the parsha. The majority of the parsha is tsarat, often mistranslated as leprosy, is a super-rational plague, natural plague, which can afflict people as well as garments or homes. If white or pink patches appear on a person's skin, dark red or green garments, a Kohen is summoned. The Kohen is the priest, judging by various signs, such as an increase in size of the afflicted area. After a 7-day quarantine, the Kohen pronounces it tameh, impure, or tahor, pure. A person afflicted with tsarat must dwell alone outside the camp or city until he is healed. The afflicted area in a garment or home must be removed. If that tsarat reoccurs, the entire garment or home must be destroyed. That is essentially the first portion. As outlined in the start of the portion of Metzora, when the Metzora leper heals, he or she is purified by the Kohen with a special procedure involving 2 birds, spring water in an earthen vessel, a piece of cedar wood, a scarlet thread, and a bundle of hyssop. And of course, some of the commentaries are looking to figure out why these materials, what is the symbolism of these materials, etc. When a home is afflicted with tsarat, in a process lasting as long as 19 days, a Kohen determines if the house can be purified or whether it must be demolished. Ritual impurity is also engendered through a seminal or other discharge in a man, and menstruation or other discharge of blood in a woman, necessitating purification through immersion in a mikvah. So I guess many, or if not most, of the laws of purity and impurity, not most, but many of the laws of purity and impurity in the Torah appear in this week's parsha, in the heart of the book of Leviticus. I guess one of the questions to ask is why here? What is the first? Okay, I guess what is the meaning of purity and impurity? But also, why here? What happens at this point in the plot? Even though we like to think of the Leviticus as not much of a plot because it's mostly laws. But why here? Why here in the Torah do we get to the point of purity and impurity? So that's something to think about. So there are various ways to think about what is the concept of ritual impurity. What does it mean? What does it represent? So we'll just start with dispelling one notion, incorrect notion. Somehow, the conventional interpretation would be that impurity represents something negative, and it shows that there's a problem within the person. And that is true to an extent, but the other side of that coin is that impurity ritual impurity that is understood to mean to apply specifically to where there is holiness. Something that is not accessible to holiness, something that cannot become holy, does not become impure. The more the thing has access to holiness, the more it has potential for impurity. So impurity is the negative side, but the other side of impurity is purity. So again, some object or some object that's not connected to the concept of holiness is not going to have purity. So in other words, impurity is the other side of holiness. If I have access, if I could become impure, it means I have a degree of holiness. And the way the mystics like to think about this is that there's a spirit of impurity, however you define it. That spirit of impurity tries to go to where there's purity. And where there's purity, therefore, there'll be potential to impurity. Something that is not susceptible to holiness also has no attraction to the forces of impurity. So that's just a little bit of background. Let's try to speak about it in more simple psychological terms. Simple terms, not even psychological, simple terms. And again, the question is why? What is the context here? Why are we talking about laws of purity and impurity, specifically in the middle of the book of Leviticus? The simple answer is it's in the middle of the book. You bury all the boring concepts in the middle of the book. People open the book, they open the beginning, they open the end. The middle is boring. That's a joke. I don't mean it to say that way. The contrary, in some sense, the middle is the essence. But let's leave that alone for a second. What happens now in the story? So where are we up to in the narrative? So the narrative, the Jewish people left Egypt in the second book of the Torah. They received the Torah in the middle of the second book of the Torah. They build a home for God, which is basically the second half of the book of Exodus, the second book. They build a home from God. In the third book, we talk about, okay, what are they going to do in the home for God? They're going to bring offerings. Okay, that's the first two portions. Then you got to last week's parsha, which we didn't read because Thursday we didn't read together. We didn't discuss because Thursday was the holiday. So we couldn't get together. Okay, in any case, what is Shemini? What's the eighth day? After 7 days of inauguration comes the eighth day. What happens on the eighth day? Aaron offers the offerings, and an unbelievable thing happens. The divine presence dwells in the temple. They saw the glory of Hashem. They see the cloud coming, and it's amazing because this is many months of anticipation. The Jewish people now have a symbol that Hashem, God, forgave them for the sin of the golden calf, and now once again wants to dwell in their midst. Wonderful. Isn't that an amazing feat? And the Jewish people are rejoiced. The Torah describes the people saw and rejoiced, and they fell on their faces. In other words, this is an extremely joyous event, and everything looks to be fine that morning. As you know the story, I'm just going to pull it up here. Leviticus 11. You know the story, so we'll just do it quickly. What the story is like this. The story is that on that day, the first of Nisan, the eighth day of the inauguration, it also became a very tragic day in a way because Aaron's two sons die. It's very interesting. The response to that death is very interesting. God tells Aaron and his sons that they can't let their own personal mourning interfere with the joy of the community. And therefore, they were not allowed to deal and become impure and deal with the two brothers who were killed. Their cousins, in fact, did. But that's another discussion. We're going to read a little bit what happened on that day and how the death came about. So the verse reads, you can even go, this is chapter 10, you can even go to chapter 9 and read the end. The end is after the culmination of all the 7 days of inauguration, as well as the eighth day. The verse reads, verse 24, and a fire went forth from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offerings and fats upon the altar, and all the people saw, saying praises by Aroinu. Laron is in one of the expressions of joy. Here they are translating it as singing from joy. In any case, the people saw, saying praises, and fell on their faces because they see sort of a physical manifestation of the divine presence, the fire coming forth and consuming the offerings. And again, that's a sign that God, forgave the people. Okay, what happens then? Turn the page. And Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, each took his pan, put fire in them, and placed incense upon it. And they brought before the Lord foreign fire, which he had not commanded them. So they're so excited. Everyone's so excited. What do? They take a pan, they put on incense, and they bring it close before Hashem. We assume means they go all the way into the Holy of Holies. Later, we know the commandment that only Aaron himself, only on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, and only after certain preparations is he allowed to enter the Holy of Holies. Nobody else can. But at this point, it's not written explicitly. Nobody knows it necessarily yet. What happens then? Fire went forth from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Okay, Aaron's response, Moses' response, that's very interesting for last week. What is interesting for us? So right now, right after we have the story, all of a sudden, we have many laws of purity and impurity. And they actually started last week, because last week, at the end of that parsha, right after this story, we start hearing about the laws of kosher animals and non-kosher animals, which the Torah also refers to as with the expression of pure and impure. The kosher species are pure, the non-kosher species are impure. So right after the story, we start getting into purity of animals, and then in this week's parsha of people, which is an interesting Rashi. Rashi quotes the Medrash, why the impurity and purity of the animals precede the people, but that's another discussion. But in any case, right after the story of building the temple, constructing the temple, the divine presence dwelling amongst the people, the two sons of Aaron, now we spend many, many verses, chapters and verses discussing purity and impurity. And of course, the question is, how come? Why at this spot? So this gives one theory or one aspect or one angle of what purity represents and what impurity represents. And in short, briefly, what the idea is as follows. The human being, there's this pull, there's this tension between wanting to come close to Hashem, wanting to come close to God. And any spiritual seeker wants that. On the other hand, the other side of that coin is there also has to be the distance. And the distance comes from the fact, either because it's impossible to come close to the infinity of God, but also we may not be worthy of coming close to God. We have to prepare. You can't just show up. And that tension between the desire to come close, but not too close, because that's really essentially the story of the sons of Aaron. Sons of Aaron, they come too close. They have a desire to come close to God, which is wonderful. The problem is they follow that desire to the extreme without any boundaries, without any limitations, without sensing the distance between the creation and the creator. In the language of the Kabbalah, they call it running without returning. In other words, they just completely run, but they're not grounded in reality. So we can talk about that. But in one sense, what we're saying here is that specifically when the Jewish people build a home for God, and specifically when there is holiness in their midst, specifically when the divine presence dwells in their midst, now the question is, I have to ask myself, am I worthy to come close all the time, or does it take preparation? In other words, there's the desire of love, which is to draw close, but then there's also the desire of respect. I'm coming into your space. Am I coming in with the proper attitude? Am I coming in with the proper humility? It's true within relationships between people. It's also certainly true with the relationship between people and God, which God is infinite and we're finite. So the tuma, the impurity, reflects this truth that there is, in some sense, a gap, maybe even an unbridgeable gap between creation and creator. And we have to be cognizant that we can't always come close, because essentially impurity means you can't come to the temple. Right? Today, what practical application of impurity and impurity is that we can't come to the temple mountain, and we cannot eat the flesh of the offerings, but we don't have offerings, so it's not that practical. But in biblical times, as we discussed yesterday, it was much more part of daily life. But the point here is, I have to recognize that I cannot just come close to God as I am, because I'm not necessarily on that level. I have to prepare. When I prepare, that's when I can come close. But that certain respect and sensing the distance and sensing the fact that I have to overcome the distance to be able to come close. So that's that pull between the desire to come close and the recognition of awe, of distance. That's where the purity and impurity play out. So that's a little bit of introduction about purity and impurity. So again, when you hear the word impure, it's not telling you that the person is negative. To the contrary, what it's telling you is that the person has access to intense holiness, that this person, or this community, or the Jewish people at that point are able to come very close to God because God dwells in their midst. Now the question becomes, so they have a desire to come close, but the question is, are there boundaries? And the answer is yes. Because yes, we have the desire to come close, which is love. We also need awe, respect. Respect is, it's not my space. I don't really belong here. I'm going to come in here carefully and respecting the experience, which is far beyond myself. And that's where the impurity comes from. It means I can't come unless I prepare. I can't come unless I'm worthy, et cetera, et cetera. So that's about impurity in general. Now we have to start delving into what is the significance of the impurity of the tzarat, which we discuss every year. But we also want to think about, more important, we're not here to discuss the problem with the tzarat. We want to hear about the healing process. And sometimes you look at the way that impurity is described, and that's a key to understand how the healing will occur. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is an introduction. Of course, as always, any comments or questions, please share it. No need to wait for the end. And anything that's interesting, you can raise. Otherwise, we continue to the specifics of the portion of the double portion of the impurity of the tzarat, of the leprosy, and the purity, how to be purified from it. Okay, so let's think a little bit about the specifics of the tzarat. Okay, so this is this parsha. I'm skipping the first thing about the woman giving birth, which is also very interesting, but we'll leave that for another time. We're going to go to chapter 13, and we start talking about the tzarat. So the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, if a man has a se'et, a sapachat, or baheret, what these terms mean is another story. Literally, se'et, okay, they're names for forms of discolorings of the skin. Some of the commentaries talk about exactly what each word means and what it represents. We may get to that, we'll see. But in any case, so you have this coloring of the flesh. And it forms a lesion of tzarat on the skin of the flesh. He shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons, the Kohanim. And again, the Kohen looks at it, and it all depends on what it looks like. Is it expanding? Is it not expanding? Etc. Is there black hair and they are not black hair? So first is a quarantine, and then you see if it spreads, and then you could determine whether or not the person is pure or impure. Okay, so what is this tzarat and what does it represent? The Torah does not give us any information. The written Torah does not give us any explicit information. The commentaries, the Medrash commentaries, most of them say that this is more of an unnatural phenomenon, and it comes as a result of someone who speaks lashon hara, which is translated as evil, mal speech, bad speech about other people. Definition of lashon hara is not really slander, because technically slander is saying something that is not true. Lashon hara could be saying something that is true, but generally speaking negative about other people, even if it's true, if there is no purpose. That would be the definition of lashon hara. If again, the broad definition, there are many specifics in what exactly fits the bill of lashon hara, what doesn't. But in any case, Maimonides, for example, says that this is an expression of, this is a punishment for lashon hara, for evil speech. So the later commentaries actually point out that it's actually maybe alluded to in the word Metzora, sara'at. So the word sarat is the affliction, And Metzora is the person who has this affliction, and the Torah uses the term Metzora later when it comes to the purity. What does Metzora mean? What does the word represent? So some of the commentators explain that Metzora could actually be a combination of two words. Metzora could be motzi ra. You're taking out the evil, expressing evil. What happens when I talk? When I talk, I'm evil about somebody. I'm revealing and expressing that person's negativity. As a result, in the Torah, the punishments, the divine punishments are supposed to be measure for measure. So as a result, the negativity, the leprosy or the ailment comes to the surface, which is the skin. And that shows the person that there's a problem that I have to try to correct. Now, in some ways, the ritual impurity of the tzarat is the most severe. Why am I saying that? Because the penalty is supposed, not the penalty, but to protect from this tzarat, the person has to be quarantined, but he has to be alone and he has to be separate from everybody else. We don't find that with any other form of impurity. So in some sense, this is the most severe form of impurities. Let's talk about that for just 1 second. I just want to find the verse here. Okay, so if we share the screen and we go to chapter 12, verse 45. And the person with the tzarat, in whom there is a lesion, his garments shall be torn, his head shall be unshorn, he shall cover himself down to his mustache. That's how people did as a sign of mourning. And he call out unclean, or tameh, ritually impure. And then verse 46, all the days the lesion is upon him, he shall remain unclean, he is unclean, he shall dwell isolated, his dwelling shall be outside the camp. And here the commentaries point out that other forms of impurity were sent outside the camp, but the impure people can hang out. Here, the person with the tzarat has to be alone. So why is that? So if you see tzarat as just people who are afraid of the illness spreading, so they have to quarantine, then we understand. But even so, you quarantine each person alone was very uncommon. But in any case, from the perspective of the classic commentators, we're talking about more of a spiritual ailment. So it has to become a result for motzi ra, for speaking evil about people. And what happens is, the reason why speaking evil about people is considered so detrimental that would necessitate God coming and performing, in a sense, a miracle and making this person's skin discolor because of evil speech. What the Torah is really telling us is this is very severe. Why is this so severe? It's not the worst sin. I didn't steal any of your money. I didn't burn down your home. I didn't gore your animal. What's the big deal? I say something bad about the other person. And what happens is, if you think about this, the fabric of the community, social cohesion, gets torn up if people speak bad about each other, certainly if they do so behind their back. In other words, if I tell people negative things and people accept it and people keep passing it around, and then everybody is suspect of everybody, because who knows, it may look like you're my friend, but behind my back, who knows what you're talking about. So that really destroys the sense of community. And today we don't necessarily need a community as much. I could live alone. I could mind my own business. But in the ancient world, you literally needed the community to survive. And the discord, the tearing up within the society, is probably the most dangerous thing that you can do. You see this in the world today. You see this in societies that are falling apart with disagreements. That's probably the greatest threat. I don't want to get political, but you see that's happening in Israel today. This is a tremendous threat, that people within society don't trust that the other people have their best interest in mind. So in other words, that speech is really, that evil speech represents the separation and the dissolving of the inner respect and love that's supposed to be in the community. Okay, so if you think about it, you think about it and you say, so the punishment for that is to be outside the camp, to be alone. In other words, if I'm acting to destroy the community, if I'm tearing up the community, then I cannot benefit from that community. And when I'm outside the camp, I realize that being alone is overrated. In other words, being alone is a terrible psychological space to be in. Can't connect to other people. Then I realize the value of the community. And then when I'm healed and I come back into the community, then I'm healed in the sense that I appreciate it and I'm not going to speak negatively to tear up that society and community that I'm part of, that I benefit from. So that's one way to look at it. You're looking at it as there was something positive in this community. As an individual, I'm tearing it up. So if I'm tearing it up, I cannot benefit from it. I have to be expelled from that community until I realize, and I realize my mistake and realize the value of the community. Then I could be ushered, and then I can re-enter. But at this point, I'm healed. So that's the conventional way of understanding the significance of the tzarat and why it comes, and why sitting alone is the healing process, and then why, or the consequence, but also the healing process, and then how you come back in, how you become part of the community. That's the conventional interpretation. But there are other things that add a little bit. We may have said some of these in the past, but I think it's interesting. So let's try to go a little bit deeper, just a little bit deeper, and we'll see what we come up with. Okay, so we touched upon this a little bit yesterday, that if you think about it, what does tzarat come from? So tzarat, we said, comes from negative speech. But why am I speaking negatively about other people? Because I don't like them. Okay, what's really happening here? So in some sense, one way to think about this is, that essentially it comes from jealousy. If I speak negatively about somebody else, why am I worried about somebody else? Why does that person bother me? So more often than not, if someone else bothers me, if you really think about this, if someone else bothers me, in some sense, I'm jealous of that person's either what they have, or the personality they are, or the talent that they have. Maybe they may be using it in the wrong way, but maybe I want to use it in the right way. But in any case, very often it's really what it really is a sense of jealousy. So instead of I'm uncomfortable with the person I am, with what I have, so the easy thing to do is to put down the other person and tell everybody else that this person that you respect, this person is no good. That's essentially what one root cause of the speech. The negative speech is just the result. It's like the symptom. The cause, the inner cause of why am I speaking negatively about somebody else is because everybody's enamored with this person. And I say, that makes me uncomfortable. So I'm a little jealous. So I say, oh, you think that person is so great? No, let me tell you the truth about it. Okay. So that is essentially, that's what's happening here. Now, what did we say till now? We said till now that you're going to isolate this person who gets the tzarat. He's isolated. So the healing for this is being isolated, realizing that don't tear up the community because you benefit from the community. And being in isolation is so terrible. And then I want to come back into the community and I'll appreciate the fact that we're all together, create a community, and I get from you and you get from me. We all have something to add. Wonderful. But this interpretation I'm about to present is a little bit deeper. It's being alone. It's not that being alone shows me that I'm missing the community. That's not what it's doing. It's actually the opposite. If I'm alone, then I have to survive on my own. Then I have to take care of myself. Then I have to keep myself busy. I can't be distracted by other people. In other words, what's really happening here is when a person is alone, the person will focus inward. the person will focus on what they can do to survive and what they can do to value themselves, because they're not really interacting with anybody else because there's no one else to interact with. So when I'm in society, I value myself in comparison with other people, right? All the studies show this, that whether or not somebody thinks they're rich or poor, for example, it all depends on where I'm living and what the people around me have. So we don't really have an objective benchmark of what is considered what I want, or what is considered wealth, or what is considered make me comfortable with what I have. It all depends on, I'm looking outward. I always compare myself with the people around me, and that's how I evaluate myself. Now, if that's the way I evaluate myself, what's going to happen inevitably is that there's going to be certain people that I'm jealous of, and certain people that I'm jealous of, and therefore that will lead to the jealousy. But ultimately, jealousy is a feeling of inadequacy. Jealousy is, I'm not happy with myself, and therefore your success bothers me, and therefore I'm going to do what I can, consciously or subconsciously, to tear apart your success. Okay, what happens if I'm alone? Now I cannot compare myself, especially I'm alone in the desert, really. They were in a desert camp. So I'm alone. I can't value myself based on somebody else. There is no anybody else. Now I have to live myself. I have to survive. I have to make breakfast. I have to make lunch. I can't go to the bagel store to buy a bagel. Everything I have to do on my own. What that does is it makes the person turn inward. And inward is, first of all, discovering what their own skills are, discovering their own talents. But maybe even more important is discovering that my well-being is not, I don't get to that. I don't value myself in comparison or in relation to other people. And in some sense, that is the quality that heals the person and lets the person come back to the camp and appreciate other people, because the other person now is no longer a threat to me, because your success doesn't threaten me, because I don't value myself in comparison to you. You may be more beautiful than I, you may be more successful, more wealthy, more talented, but I don't value myself based upon you. I value myself, my inner core, what my skills are, what my talents are, and that's what I value. And therefore, being outside is in fact the way to heal the jealousy, which comes from an inadequacy, which then leads to evil speech, which then tears apart the community. So we're going on different layers of what this evil talk represents and how to heal it. And in some sense, so the first interpretation we gave is that being alone shows me what I don't have. I'm not part of the community, how painful it is not to be part of the community. And therefore, I realize that, no, I benefit from my neighbors. I benefit from the people around me. Even if I don't like the person, but I come, I see you, you see me, we're all happier. So that's the first interpretation. The separation reminds me of what I don't have. Second interpretation is the isolation actually reminds me of what I do have. And my own value, my own talents, my own value, independent of other people. And that essentially is the true healing, because healing, I can, if I outsource my own value to other people, to society, to what people think is valuable, then I'm always going to feel inadequate, and I'm always going to feel jealous of the people who are more successful than I. But if I'm alone doesn't mean I have to go out of town for this, but alone means I see myself. When I'm alone, if I'm alone, it's easier to do this. But talking about taking the message from this is if I'm sitting alone, if I am sitting alone, and it means I see myself for what I am, not in relation to other people. Okay, so that's one idea I thought it was very beautiful, and about the sitting alone. Okay. A lot more to say, but I think we'll do a little bit now. Maybe I'll read something inside from a Hasidic commentator that we have not done in the past, I don't think, but we'll read inside and we'll see how the Hasidic commentators try to make this more relevant and try to give a deeper meaning to some of the verses. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to plug in. Let's move the table back, plug in, and then we'll give us enough juice. Excuse me. Sorry. Okay, that's working, which is good. We want to go back to the verses and so we can reinterpret some of them.
Just as you're going back, when you talked about the different details of the Lashon Hara, is that when they talk about the 7 or the 11 issues that come into it?
Yeah, so there's a whole body of law, and the Chafetz Chaim in the 19th century wrote a whole book, really early 20th century, wrote a whole book about the intricacies of the laws of Lashon Hara. And when speaking negatively, it actually could be beneficial, right? Because if somebody is doing something wrong and I alert people to the fact that they're doing something worse to protect people, then it's actually, not only is it the right thing, but it's actually an obligation, right? So what we're talking here is more just negative speech in general for no purpose other than an expansion of my ego. I cannot tolerate you, and I see you're more popular than I, so I'm going to try to tear you down. And the problem with that is it seems trivial. It's just words. What's so bad? The reality is it can tear people apart. It can tear communities apart. In some sense, the most important thing I have is my reputation. If you steal a few dollars from me, if you burn down my house, okay, that's one thing. But my reputation is more important. My credibility is more important than that. And it really could take a profound effect on separating people and tearing up using communities. But remember, we're talking, there can be tremendous ramifications, even financially. If nobody trusts me, no one will give me a loan, etc. So this is all under the general banner of negative speech. Sometimes negative speech is not negative. Sometimes negative speech is actually helpful. In other words, helpful for the benefit of people. So, like I said, whenever people ask you a Talmudic question, the best answer is it depends, because often it depends.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share this screen and we're going to do the second verse. We'll look at the second verse. We'll look at the second verse of the portion that talks about the tzarat, and we'll read the simple interpretation, and then we'll give a little bit more of the mystical interpretation. So here we go. So again, we actually read the verse earlier. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, if a man has se'et, sapachat, baheret on the skin of his flesh, and it forms a lesion of tzarat on the skin of his flesh, he shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons, the Kohanim. So first, I'll give you the general idea, the thesis of how this Hasidic commentator reads these verses, and maybe we'll read it inside to make it a little bit more interesting, so you don't have to get it in second person, you can get it from first person. What the Hasidic interpretation says is as follows. Again, essentially the point here is that the negative speech is a result of arrogance. But in the arrogance, there's different places where arrogance comes from. One place would be, like we mentioned before, I'm jealous of you. Another place arrogance can come from, I have my own quality. I have an objective quality. It's not that I'm feeling that I am insufficient, but to the contrary, I feel like I have a quality. I'm better than everybody around me because I may have certain qualities that are better than the people around me. So what we're going to read this verse and say, if a person has a certain quality, and you're going to see how these words, Eitzapach and the Beheret, represent not only a name for a skin disease, but actually the names, embedded in the names, is they're actually very positive names. And therefore, we're going to read this verse to mean somebody has qualities. The problem is those qualities now become tzarat, they become a lesion, they become something negative, because their attitude toward those qualities is misplaced. So what's the solution? Solution is, he shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons, the Kohanim. Now, the simple interpretation is, well, you have to go to the Kohen because the Kohen will give you the diagnosis whether or not you're pure or impure. Okay. But the Hasidic commentator says, no. bring the quality to the priest, to the Kohen, bring the quality to holiness, and you will learn how to use the quality for holiness and how that, therefore, that quality will no longer lead you to arrogance, but will actually be productive. So in this verse, the first verse that introduces the concept of the skin problem, the discoloring, that now causes impurity and has to be brought to the priest. So this is actually very profound insight, that sometimes what my biggest problem, what causes the problem, is actually something positive. I have a certain positive quality. The problem is that its expression is in the wrong way. And almost every quality could be used to the positive or the negative. Person is stubborn. Okay, so stubborn, you can name it, label it stubborn, and say, I'm this terrible, my child is so stubborn. You can say the same thing and say this person is persistent. So which one is it? Well, it depends. It depends how it's used. It depends in what context. But the point here is, to get the healing, you don't have to tell you that this quality is negative. To the contrary, it's a positive quality that turned negative, that's used in a negative way. The solution is bring it back to the priest, bring it to the context of holiness. So that's that verse. I'll try to read it inside from my notes, maybe to see if it's interesting for you. Try to translate to the best of my ability. We'll see what happens. Okay. Says like this. This is from a book, a Hasidic book called Be'er Mayim Chaim, 19th century Kabbalistic, Hasidic commentator. So he says like this. The verse says as follows: Adam, a man who will have in the skin of his flesh, se'et. Se'et was that first word that we mentioned. First name for one of the names of those skin diseases. But literally, the word se'et means laset, is to lift up. So this person has a certain quality which makes him uplifted more than the people around him. Now, the next word is sapachat. Person has se'et or sapachat. Sapachat comes from the word, is basically an addition. In biblical Hebrew, sapachat is an addition. Add me to the group is sapeachoti. Even today, annexation in modern Hebrew, there's discussion. Should they annex the West Bank? Should they not the West Bank? Judea and Samaria, should they not? In modern Hebrew, it's called sipuach. Sipuach is to add something to what is essential. So this commentator says as follows. He says like this: what is outside the body? What's a quality? A person who's uplifted. Why am I uplifted? I have a certain talent. But then I can have other talents that they're my talent. They're things that I have that are good qualities, but they are addition to me. Why? They're external. So we're talking about external qualities. What are external qualities? So he says, for example, wealth. Money is not you. It's not wisdom. It's not you. It's something outside of you. It's something physical, but you can have that quality as well. And then he says, then there's baheret. Baheret means bahir. Bahir means bright. So that could be an example for something that the body, it's more physical, something that the body has, either physical beauty, or it can have other qualities of the body. A person can have a nice voice, a person can have wisdom. So we basically have three categories of qualities. We have se'et, elevation, elevated spiritual state. That's the first one. Se'et, your person's uplifted spiritually. You could have sapachat, you could have success in the sense that's of something that's external to you, added to you. You have a big bank account, okay? You have a lot of assets, you have a portfolio, okay? So that's outside of you. It's not you, it's outside of you. So you can have a quality in that realm. And then you can have in the quality in the fact that you're bright. Bahir is bright. You're bright. Bright is it's a physical quality. It could be beauty, it could be a voice, it could be wisdom, etc. Fine. So a person has any of these. The problem is that sometimes these qualities not only could they be used negatively, in other words, not for the positive, it could actually turn negative. And here's a very interesting Kabbalistic concept that originates in one of the most earliest Kabbalistic work from the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. And it's a very beautiful, very, very, very beautiful idea. He says that the word nega, affliction, here we call nega tzarat, an affliction of tzarat. The words nega, the word affliction, and the word oneg, the word pleasure, is the same letters. Nega is nun gimel ayin. Oneg is you take the ayin from the back of the word, put it in the beginning of the word. So nega and oneg is the same word. pleasure and affliction. And he says affliction is the lowest level. That's the lowest, most severe impurity is the impurity of the affliction of the tzarat. So he says there's nothing in this book of formation, which is one of the earliest books of the Kabbalah, as I mentioned, speaks very cryptically. But he says there's nothing lower than a nega. There's nothing higher than pleasure. And it's the same letters, which is strange. So the point here is that the same quality often could be very powerful qualities, things that are very potent, could either be very good or very bad. They're usually not just neutral. In other words, things that are profound, things that are powerful are usually either good or bad. So that's what he's saying. This person can have any of these qualities. Se'et, spiritual elevation. Sapachat, he's successful in something that's external to himself, which is, for example, wealth. Or Baheret, there is brightness, which is a physical quality, represents physical qualities, but these things became negative. They became a nega. Says the verse, you don't have to destroy this. These are qualities. Don't fight the quality. He says the correction is bring this quality to Aharon HaKohen, to Aaron the priest. That alludes to the fact that you have to use this quality as a Kohen. What does Kohen mean? Kohen is priest. But in biblical Hebrew, the etymology of Kohen is service. So he says it's not enough. Let's say I have a certain quality, and that quality made me arrogant, and that arrogance makes me speak about somebody else negatively. Okay, so how do I heal that? Not enough to ignore that quality that led to the arrogance. To the contrary, use that quality bring it to the Kohen, bring it to the priest, but priest means service. Use that in the service of Hashem. Use that in the service of holiness. So in other words, it's not enough that you're not going to use this quality for something negative, but you have to actually transform it to something positive. Make it from the oneg, from the nega to an oneg. Make it from the affliction to pleasure. And then he says something very interesting. Let's go back to the verse. He says as follows. So the verse reads, Vehaya, a person, where we read verse 2. A person, if a man has a se'et sapachat or beheret on the skin of his flesh, and it forms a lesion of tzarat on the skin of his flesh, he shall be brought to Aaron the Kohen, or to one of his sons the Kohanim, and then vehaya, it forms. It forms. So the Hebrew word is vehaya, it will be, it shall be. It shall be a lesion of tzarat on the skin of his flesh. It shall be. So the Talmud explains that when the Torah uses the term vehaya is always an expression of joy. It means something good is about to take place. That's vehaya. Vayehi is negative. Vehaya is positive. That's the rule. So now look at this verse and we say, oh, unbelievable. A person has a quality, and vehaya, it will be, but it will be means we're saying something that's positive. It will be for an affliction. The nega tzarat, a lesion of tzarat, really affliction of tzarat. It's very strange. Why are we so excited? Why are you so excited that this quality becomes negative and led to this problem that this person has? Now he's arrogant, etc., because of the quality. So now we say, if you're going to bring this quality to the priest, if you're going to use this quality that Hashem gave you to the service of God, then v'huva, then it's actually joyous, because what happens is you have the advantage of the transforming the negative to the positive, which is a far deeper advantage than if there was no negativity as well at all. So in other words, the process of having something negative and using it for something and transforming it to positive, that's the great joy. That is something that we want to talk about and celebrate. And this leads us to the final point that I want to talk about today. We have only 5 minutes left, but we'll talk about it. And that's as follows. Also related to this word of vehaya, it will be, which denotes joy. So this I spoke about in the past, and that is, you know about this, but I'll say it again very briefly. We're going to talk about the tzarat of the home. So we talked about the idea that in the first parsha we have tzarat, which is the affliction, the skin affliction that comes upon the skin. There's also tzarat in the first parsha. It talks about tzarat that hits garments. That's the first parsha. Next parsha, we read about the purification. After we read about the purification, we read another story. What's the new story? We say, oh, there's also there's also tzarat of the home. I mean, you mentioned this in the past, so you know this, but I'm just going to say it because it's very important to think about. So what happens when we talk about the tzarat of the home? So here we have verse 34. The verse says like this, 33. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, when you come to the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as a possession, and I place a legion of tzarat upon a house in the land of your possession. So again, the problem is that this verse, especially in the Hebrew, sounds like this is not something negative, it's something positive. God is saying, when you come to the land of Canaan, I'm going to place, not if, not maybe, when you come to Canaan, I'm going to place tzarat in your home. So just from the wording, it sounds like this is something positive. How could tzarat, impurity, be positive? Especially that in some cases, and tzarat of the home, if it spreads, they have to take out a few stones. And if it spreads further, they have to actually destroy the home. Okay, so what's the good news? So here you have Rashi on verse 34. So I will place a legion of tzarat, says Rashi in Hebrew, v'natati, literally, and I will give. This is good news for them. Metzora means heralding of good news. This is good news for them, that legions of tzarat will come upon them. Quotes the Medrash, Torah Kohanim. Why? Because the Amorites had hidden away treasures of gold inside the walls of their houses during the entire 40 years that the Israelites were in the desert. And through the legion, he will demolish the house, see verses 43 to 45, and find them. This comes from the Medrash. So the Medrash is saying something, is explaining the verse, but there's also a tremendous amount of figurative imagery here. So what is the Medrash saying? The Medrash is saying that the natives of the land would hide their wealth. Where would they hide their wealth? There was no bank, so they hid their wealth within the walls. Now, I could be living in a home, there could be wealth here, there could be treasures here, but I don't see it. So I have no access to it. And when the tzarat will come about, when the affliction would come about, eventually a person would have to remove the stones. You remove the stone that what you thought was impurity, maybe it really was impurity, actually is hiding behind it, hides, and it's hiding a great treasure. And there's a lot of symbolism here, related to what we said earlier. And that is that very often in the negative quality, in the negative trait, or in the negative situation, is actually an invitation to create the treasure. In other words, if you're able to transform this experience to positive, then you actually have a greater treasure than you had you not had this challenge to begin with. And it's true in many areas, but just to follow from the previous commentator, we're talking about somebody that has a certain quality. That quality, either spiritual quality or wealth, external, or quality of the body, beauty, good voice, good smarts, is that good or bad? Well, it depends. It could be used for positive, it could be used for negative, it could be used in the service of God and the expansion of goodness in the world, or it could just be used for arrogance. So often what we're saying is when there is a problem, when there's negativity, and then it's really an invitation to correct it, to fix it, and what you'll get at the end of the process, you get a treasure that you would not have access to had you not gone through that experience of transforming the negative to positive. So this is literally a drop in the bucket, a lot more to say. Some of this we said last year, some of this is new from this year. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbat, and we'll see each other in good health. And most importantly, when you see that negativity, understand that it's likely that just behind this wall, the treasure lies, waiting for you to transform it.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Have a great week.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Wonderful week.
Thank you, Coach Tov.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Be well.